Hey, what's going on? I'm Ian and this is Beautiful Iron Garage. In this video I'm going to show you how I turned a piece of flat sheet metal like this one into this running board for a 1937 Cadillac LaSalle. So here's what we're starting with. We have two sheets of 18 gauge cold rolled steel that we're going to actually make the running boards out of. And we have a 10-foot piece of 1.5-inch conduit and 2 lengths of 1-inch wide, 1/8-inch thick angle iron that will actually make a skeleton form that we can clamp the sheet metal to and bend it around to make the shape that we want. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is cut this piece of pipe in half and then bend it on a tubing bender to give it the contour of this edge, one piece, and the other piece should just be a straight piece. That's going to be the contour of this edge of the running board. Okay, so as you can see, we have our piece of pipe cut in half. And now what we want to do is match this radius. So what I'm going to do is take this piece of pipe, put it in this tubing bender, and just start to gradually bend it until it's the same radius as this. A tubing bender like this isn't really going to do a tight piece of pipe. It'll kink before it does it. But just for gradual bends like this, you should be able to do it without a problem. So we have our piece of pipe in the bender. And what I'm going to do is just a little tiny bit at a time and take it out and match it up to our piece, because it'd be really easy to go too far, and once it's too far there's no real going back. So a little bit of patience here just to make sure it's right, and so you only have to do it once. So at the end of the running board here, after this gradual curve towards me, it starts to curve back in a straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this piece of pipe at the end and take a little pie slice out of it and curve it back to bring it back to straight. Okay, we got the curve, we have the shape that we want, it fits the outside, or the inside rather, of this running board really nice. The only thing we have to do is weld up this seam and grind it totally smooth, and we're going on to the next side. So this pipe is electrical conduit that you can get at any hardware store. And when I go to weld this seam, what you want to do first is grind that coating, of that galvanized coating, off before you weld it so you can get a good weld. And it's really not good to breathe in, so you want to have a dust mask or some type of respirator, and you want to wear it. So we have our piece back clamped to the running board, so when we go to tack it, we know it's all still the right shape, and we can just give it a couple to keep it rigid, and then take it off and weld it up on the bench. There you go. That should be good. now it's time to do the front piece. Okay, so this back piece is going to fit in there without any major modifications at all. All we have to do is cut about 1 inch off the end so it'll fit down in there and we can go on from there. So we have this front piece clamped on nice and tight, and the back piece is clamped on nice and tight. Now I want to take this square, and when it's all the way to the end of this piece, I just want to make a reference, because this one's at a different angle, where it's going to be in relation. And then I'm going to take both of these pieces off and clamp them to the table. So I want to know exactly how far apart the furthest edge is on this piece to the furthest edge on this piece. So I'll do that. And it's exactly 14 inches. So we're going to mark that down, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, and we're going to take both of these pipes off and clamp them down to the table exactly that far apart. Okay, so we have our 2 tubes clamped to the table exactly where they're supposed to be, and they're clamped down nice and tight so they don't move. And it's not a bad idea to just keep taking measurements as you're going to make sure nothing's moved, because when it's all done, you want it to be right. So now we're going to make some cross braces from one side to the other out of this angle iron. And I have a piece already cut, and one of the things that you want to do is, because you're going to be clamping the steel flat to the top of this, you want this to be exactly level with the 2 tops of the pipe, so when you clamp your steel to it, you're not putting indents in it where the angle iron meets the tube. So it's good to put this across and make sure you don't want it low, because then when you clamp it, you'll be pulling it down, but you don't want it to be high. So I have these little notches cut out so it fits down in there, and I'm going to do about 4 of those on this side, and then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do 4 on that side. And here we go. Okay, I have all the pieces for this side cut. They're just sitting on there, and I'm going to clean the coating off of the pipe and the mill scale off of the angle. And I'm going to get everything tacked up, and once it's tacked, take my measurements again, make sure everything's still square, leave it clamped to the table, and fully weld all this stuff and grind it down smooth and flip it over and do the other side. So this side of all these brackets are all fully welded and then ground down smooth, and it's all cool now. So we can unclamp it without worrying about it moving anymore, and flip it over and do some on the other side. Now the reason I'm doing so many is that these are going to be what I'm going to clamp the sheet metal to, one side for this curve and then the opposite side for this curve. And you can never have too many clamps, because again, if you have that on there, start beating it around and it moves, you're screwed. So the more, the better you can clamp it, the better the piece is going to come out. While we were letting our camera battery charge, I got a little antsy and cut and welded in the angle for the other side and ground it all smooth. So now our buck is ready to go. And as you can see, it fits in our old running board really nicely. And the idea is, when we have our new piece of sheet metal, we'll clamp it the way that this is clamped, bend this curve into it against this pipe, and when that's all done, we'll unclamp it, put our new piece of sheet metal on top, and curve it around the other pipe. And that'll give us our new running board. So we have to rough cut the new piece of sheet metal out of the 18 gauge stock that we have, and we have to run 2 step beads in it in the front and the back, so that's what we're going to do now. So we got our buck sitting on our piece of 18 gauge cold rolled steel, and I've just scribed the line, basically traced it onto that. Not exactly, but it doesn't have to be exact yet. And I'm going to give myself about 3 inches on each side of extra material, because it's got to curve around, but I also want a little extra for breaking a little lip into the bottom of each side. And then we'll cut it out with my electric shear, and we'll roll 2 beads in the sides where we have to have them, and then we'll go from there. So we have our rough piece of sheet metal cut out here, leaving a little bit more on the sides, probably an inch more than we need after it's all bent around. But I took some measurements off of the old piece and marked where this step is going to be on the new piece and this rear step is going to be on the new piece. So we have to get out our bead roller with this small step in it, and we have to roll that bead before we can clamp it to our buck and start bending around. Okay, we got our running board here, and we're going to put it into our hand crank bead roller with the step dies in there. We're going to line it up on our line. I'm going to crank this down until I can't do it anymore with my hands, and then I'm going to turn it 2 full turns with the wrench. Actually 2.5 turns with the wrench. Now we're going to roll our bead, or step rather, into our piece of steel. Upswing is harder than the downswing. And this is probably heavier gauge steel than this bead roller is meant to actually roll. It's doing the job. And there we go. Got a nice straight step at the end of our new running board. We got the steps bead rolled in on both sides of our new running board. And now I'm going to do this curve first, and I have the old one here as a reference so I don't do it backwards. So I'm going to slip it underneath our skeleton. Line them up on that line, and I'm going to get all my clamps out, and I'm going to start clamping them down on these pieces that are flat to the bottom and get it nice and tight so that when I start hammering, nothing moves. The new running board is clamped to our buck, and everything's nice and tight, so we're going to start hammering on this edge. We're going to see if we can't make a nice curve out of it. I'm going to use this dead blow hammer to start with, just so you can see it start to work and it won't mar or damage the metal at all. And fixes, repairs that we're going to have to do afterward. Show it from long ways. If you can catch that one little kind of high line of where the curve's going to be. This is why when you're making that buck, you really want to weld it all the way together, and then when you clamp it, you can never have too many, because you're really going to be beating on this thing and moving it, especially when it's thick 18 gauge like this. It's really hard to work with. There we go. Just need to So it's the next day, and as you can see, I've kind of skipped ahead a little bit on this thing. The last time you saw it, we had our general shape roughed out over the buck here. The only thing I've done in the meantime is cut a little bit off the bottom, and I took this whole piece and I ran it through the planishing hammer right here to just take some of the major lumps out of our curve right here. And now the only thing I got to do on this side is take some measurements off of our old running board and cut this nastiness off the end. We got our lip cut off, all of our extra. Wanted to set it down on the buck just to make sure nothing moved or anything like that. And so now what we have to do is we need to roll this edge down. And the reason why I made this buck out of steel and not wood was so that I could flip it over like this. I could flip this sheet over, match this curve upside down of where it was before, and now I can clamp this all down and bend this edge over the other pipe. And if I made it out of wood, I could do the same thing for this fender, But because I'm making two, now I can use this metal buck for both sides. It's the same shape, and because I can clamp it on both sides, and it's got the contour I need for both sides, makes it a lot easier to do it like that. So we just need to clamp this thing down, get this edge bent down, and we'll be good to go. We've got everything clamped down, and now we just need to fold this tab over this side of the pipe. So I'm just going to start working my way across, just using my weight. Start to get it to bend. Have to get a hammer out just to get it started. So you can use the lights, your ceiling lights above you, to kind of follow this line, and it'll tell you if you're getting to where you need to be, because over here it's reflecting it perfectly, and then I can see in the middle it's getting a little fatter, and then it's getting skinnier again down in the end here, so you know the middle has to go further, and the sides don't have to go as far on the end. As far as we need to go. Obviously we'll be cutting off the bottom 2 inches or so of this. I'm going to unclamp this from the buck, lay it over our old running board, and see if we got everything right. Got the old running board sitting in the shell of the new one, and everything looks pretty good. Everything fits pretty nice. We just have to scribe this line, cut the extra off of that, finish that, make that curve just a little bit tighter, and we'll have the basic shell of our new running board done. It's been a couple days. I've been working busy on a lot of stuff, just working on this running board on and off, and I've made a little bit of progress. I have the old brackets cut off the bottom of the old running board, and I had to do a couple of repairs here. I had to make these little sliders for carriage bolts. I have the holes drilled in the new one and weld through primer put on the back side, and I have this lip hammered in the outside edge of the running board. And just so you know how I made this, I just took a piece of steel quick and bent it to the curve and gave myself a line right there so I can show you how I did it. So there's a lot of different ways that you could bend this around. If you have a long enough break, you could put it in that and bend it up in one shot. If you had a tipping die and a bead roller, you could do it that way. But the way I like to do it, and you have a lot of control over it, is just by taking a regular old pair of channel locks like this, and you take this front edge and you would put it on your line, and just little by little, just ever so slightly bend it up along that line. And you just want to get it started. You don't want to go all the way and stretch the hell out of your metal. You just want to get, just so it's got a little peak right there. And you can do that, you'll probably go across this line 3 or 4 times, just moving it a little bit more every time. It's kind of moving it because it's such a small piece, but you can see it starting to come around. I'll go across it twice. It's kind of hard to do when it's digging into my left hand there, but that's okay. So you really only need it, it's probably bent about 35 or 40 degrees right now up. from this piece, but you can see we're starting to make a line across the back. And now basically what that is a guide now to take a dolly, a tote dolly like this that has a totally flat edge right there, and then you can hold it right here to that flat edge and do the rest of it with a body hammer and a dolly. Like I was saying before, you can watch, just keep your eye on the shadows and the light, the way it reflects on the highs and lows. And you can see it start to come around. That's kind of the quick and dirty way to do it. It doesn't require really any kind of specialty tools. It just requires a good eye and a little bit of patience. And now, like, there's a couple little, it's high here, it's high here. It just takes some time. Straighten it out. Not a real difficult part of the job. Then you can take either a piece of sandpaper or your grinding wheel in there and just buzz it and clean it up. And you got a right angle. Now you might have to do it this way a lot of times because the way the curve is, it might prevent you from getting it into a big break or being able to use a tipping die on a bead roller. So if that's the way you got to do it, that's how it's done. So we got this outside bracket fully welded in. We got the inside bracket clamped down, and one thing I did before I took these brackets off the old running board was take a bunch of measurements of distance from the front, distance from each other, distance from the end, just so we know that when this thing is all done, it actually fits on the car and does what it's supposed to do, which is be a better looking version of the nasty old ones we had. So I got this one pretty much exactly where I need it. I measured about 100,000 times so far, and now all we need to do is weld it. And what we're doing is plug welds from the top. So we have all these holes drilled all the way down the running board, going to where the bracket is on the bottom. Now what I'll do is I'll start in the middle and I'll clamp right next to this, right here, with one of my big vice grips, something like this, and clamp it here to sandwich those two pieces of material together so there's no gap in between. It's just completely flat to that bottom piece. Now I got weld through primer on the back side of the running board itself and the top side of the bracket. So to make a little bit better weld, I'll take either a pick or a screwdriver or a little die grinder and just clean the primer off in that spot, and it gives you a lot cleaner of a weld. You can see all the welds I did on this one. Then when everything is welded up, we're going to grind it down smooth and this thing is going to be totally done. So we're going to get welding. I took and ground those weld smooth, and outside I'll show you what I did. So these are MIG welds, and they leave a lot of extra material as opposed to a TIG weld. So first thing I'm going to do is I have this flap wheel on a 4.5-inch grinder, and that's a 40 grit wheel. So I'm going to take the majority of the material off the top. I just want to grind on the weld. I don't want to grind on the metal itself. And then I'll take my air grinder with an 80 grit abrasive disc on that, and I'll smooth it all out together. And then I'll just take a DA, a dual action sander, and just smooth it all down. So this is my grinder. Like I said, that's a 40 grit wheel, and I just want to just on the weld. Once I see it starting to hit the material around it, I'm going to stop. It's starting to hit, it's starting to get flattened out. Now I'm going to take the air grinder, and again, that's an 80 grit wheel, and I'm going to, you don't want to go completely flat, but just kind of on this half of the circle, like as flat as I can without it being flat on the middle. Our plug weld is gone. Now, like I said, I'll take just a palm sander and just go over all of this just to smooth it all out. Running board for this 1937 LaSalle. All we have to do now is the entire thing again for the other side, and if you like this video, stay tuned for some more.